The announcement echoed through the grimy corridors of Denver's central bus terminal as Marcus walked away with Savannah, their laughter cutting through the diesel fumes and homeless encampment smells. "Last call for boarding, Route 47 to Sacramento," the tinny voice repeated, while I stood clutching my canceled ticket, watching my husband of 9 years disappear into the crowd with his secretary-turned-mistress. He thought he'd left me stranded, a helpless woman with no money, no connections, no way home to our suburban house in Boulder. What Marcus didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that 3 hours earlier, I'd signed the papers making me the sole owner of this very bus terminal. All $47 million worth of prime downtown Denver real estate, purchased with money from a trust fund he never knew existed. But my story doesn't begin here, standing in this bustling terminal that now belonged to me, holding evidence that would destroy both their carefully constructed lives. No, this story starts 18 months earlier, with the biggest lie I'd ever told and a secret inheritance that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Standing in our kitchen on that crisp October morning, I watched Marcus butter his toast while scrolling through emails on his phone, completely absorbed in his routine. The morning light streaming through our bay windows caught his wedding ring, the simple gold band I'd slipped onto his finger 9 years ago, when we'd promised to share everything, to build a life of honesty and trust together. If only he knew that our entire marriage had been built on the biggest lie I'd ever told. "Coffee's getting cold," I said, refilling his mug with the dark roast he preferred. Marcus looked up briefly, those green eyes that had first caught my attention at University of Colorado still as striking as ever, though lately they seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Thanks, babe. I've got that early meeting with the Henderson group today, remember? Might run late." His voice carried that distracted tone I'd grown accustomed to over the past year, the sound of a man whose attention was perpetually elsewhere. Marcus worked as a senior project manager for Morrison Construction, a mid-sized firm specializing in commercial developments. It was steady work, respectable work, but not the kind that would ever make us wealthy. Our combined income, his $85,000 and my supposed $42,000 as a part-time bookkeeper for small businesses, kept us comfortable in our modest 3-bedroom house in Boulder's Mapleton Hill neighborhood, but barely. What Marcus didn't know was that my trust fund contained $127 million. The inheritance had come from my grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield, a woman I'd barely known growing up. She'd been estranged from my parents since before I was born, something about a family business dispute that no one ever fully explained. When her lawyers contacted me 3 years into my marriage, I'd been as shocked as anyone to learn that the eccentric old woman who'd sent birthday cards with $20 bills had actually been one of Colorado's wealthiest landowners. Eleanor had made her fortune in the 1960s and 70s, quietly purchasing undervalued real estate throughout the Denver metropolitan area just before the region's massive economic boom. By the time she died, her portfolio included everything from downtown office buildings to vast stretches of undeveloped land that were now worth hundreds of millions. But there was a catch to the inheritance, one that had shaped every decision I'd made for the past 6 years. Eleanor's will included a specific clause. The money could only be accessed if I could prove I'd married for love, not financial gain. Her lawyers explained that she'd been burned by fortune hunters throughout her life, and was determined that her wealth wouldn't corrupt my marriage the way it had destroyed so many of her other relationships. To prove my marriage was genuine, I had to keep the inheritance secret for a minimum of 10 years. If Marcus and I divorced during that period, or if he learned about the money and our relationship deteriorated, the entire fortune would go to charity. Only if we remained happily married for a full decade could I reveal the truth and we could access the money together. It had seemed simple enough when I was 24 and desperately in love. Marcus and I were already engaged, already planning a future based on our feelings for each other rather than financial considerations. Keeping the secret for 10 years felt like a small price to pay for ensuring our love was real. But secrets have a way of changing people, even when they're kept with the best intentions. "Rebecca, you seem distracted lately," Marcus said, interrupting my thoughts as he gathered his briefcase and keys. "Everything okay with your clients?" I managed a smile, the same smile I'd been perfecting for 6 years. "Just busy season stuff. You know how it gets with year-end bookkeeping." The lie rolled off my tongue so easily now. In reality, I'd been using the past 6 years to quietly establish myself as one of Colorado's most successful anonymous investors. Using shell companies and carefully structured trusts, I'd been growing Eleanor's initial inheritance into something even more substantial. The modest bookkeeping business was real. I did handle finances for several small companies, but it was mainly cover for the extensive research and due diligence required to manage a 9-figure investment portfolio. Marcus kissed my cheek, his lips barely making contact before he headed toward the garage. "Don't wait up tonight. Henderson Group dinner is going to run late, and you know how these client entertainment things go." After he left, I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by the comfortable middle-class life we'd built together, and felt the familiar weight of my deception. Our house, which Marcus believed we'd stretch to afford on our combined incomes, had actually been purchased with cash from my trust fund, then carefully refinanced to create the appearance of a normal mortgage. Our cars, our furniture, even the small luxuries that Marcus attributed to careful budgeting and smart shopping, were all subsidized by wealth he knew nothing about. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd inherited a fortune specifically because Eleanor wanted to ensure I married for love rather than money. But keeping that secret had required me to lie to my husband about virtually every aspect of our financial life. How could a marriage built on deception, even well-intentioned deception, be considered genuine love? These thoughts occupied my mind as I drove to my real office. Not the small home-based bookkeeping setup Marcus knew about, but a sleek suite in downtown Denver, where I managed my investment activities under the company name Whitfield Capital Management. Only my financial advisor, Thomas Chen, and my attorney, Patricia Morrison, knew the connection between Rebecca Sullivan and the anonymous investor who'd been quietly acquiring prime real estate throughout the Rocky Mountain region. "Good morning, Rebecca," Patricia greeted me as I arrived at her law firm for our monthly review meeting. "I've got the contracts ready for your signature on the Central Bus Terminal acquisition. Are you sure about this one? It's a significant departure from your usual investment pattern." I studied the documents spread across Patricia's conference table. The Denver Central Bus Terminal was indeed different from my typical acquisitions. While most of my investments focused on appreciating assets in developing areas, the bus terminal was a fully operational transportation hub in downtown Denver. It generated steady revenue but required active management and came with complex municipal contracts and union agreements. "It's a strategic location," I explained, signing the purchase documents. "Downtown Denver is undergoing massive redevelopment, and transportation hubs are going to become increasingly valuable. Plus, there's something appealing about owning a piece of infrastructure that connects people to their destinations." What I didn't mention to Patricia was the deeper reason for my interest in the terminal. Over the past year, I'd become increasingly uncomfortable with the passive nature of most of my investments. While my portfolio grew steadily, I felt disconnected from the actual impact of my wealth. The bus terminal represented something different, a chance to own and potentially improve a facility that served working people, families, and others who couldn't afford air travel. There was also something symbolically appropriate about a woman keeping a massive secret, owning a place where people came and went, where arrivals and departures happened every day, where lives intersected briefly before continuing on their separate journeys. "The purchase price is $47 million, Patricia noted as I finished signing. "That brings your total real estate holdings to just over $200 million, not including your stock and bond portfolios. Eleanor would be impressed with how you've grown her initial inheritance." Walking back to my car after completing the purchase, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and melancholy. I now owned a piece of Denver's infrastructure, a facility that employed dozens of people and served thousands of passengers each week. But I couldn't share this achievement with the person I most wanted to tell, my husband. That evening, Marcus returned home even later than he'd predicted, stumbling through our front door just after midnight with the kind of careful movements that suggested he'd had several drinks at the Henderson Group dinner. I pretended to be asleep when he slipped into bed, but lay awake for hours thinking about the growing distance between us. Over the past year, Marcus had been working longer hours, attending more client dinners, and generally seeming less present in our marriage. I'd attributed it to stress at work, or the natural evolution of a long relationship, but lately I'd begun wondering if there were other factors involved. His phone, which used to sit casually on our kitchen counter, now remained constantly by his side. He'd developed new grooming habits, better cologne, more expensive haircuts, clothes that seemed slightly more stylish than his usual conservative style. Most troubling was how he'd begun questioning our finances in subtle ways. Comments about how we seemed to be doing better than expected on our income. Observations about how I always seemed to have money for home improvements or small luxuries. Questions about my bookkeeping clients and whether business was better than I'd let on. "You're sure the Hendersons only pay you $2,000 a month?" he'd asked the previous week, after I'd mentioned picking up groceries at Whole Foods instead of our usual King Soopers. "Because that seems like a lot of expensive food for people on our budget." I deflected with explanations about sales and coupons. But his questions were becoming more frequent and more pointed. Sometimes I caught him studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite articulate. The following Tuesday, while Marcus was at work, I decided to do something I'd been avoiding for months. I drove to Morrison Construction's offices in downtown Boulder, ostensibly to surprise my husband with lunch from his favorite sandwich shop. In reality, I wanted to observe his workplace dynamic and see if my growing suspicions about his behavior had any foundation. The Morrison Construction offices occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse in Boulder's industrial district. I'd been there countless times over the years for holiday parties and company picnics, but this was the first time I'd shown up unannounced during a normal workday. "Rebecca," called Janet Walsh, the receptionist who'd been with the company since before Marcus was hired. "What a nice surprise. Marcus is in a meeting, but I can buzz him if you'd like." "Actually, I thought I'd surprise him. Is it okay if I wait in his office?" Janet hesitated for just a moment, an expression that made my stomach tighten with unease. "Well, he's using conference room B for his meeting, so his office should be fine. You know the way." Marcus's office was exactly as I remembered it. Functional desk, engineering certificates on the walls, photos of us from various vacations and anniversaries. But there was something different. Something that made me look more carefully at the personal items scattered around his workspace. A coffee mug I didn't recognize, with lipstick stains that definitely weren't mine. A small potted plant that looked recently purchased and well cared for. Most suspicious was a framed photo on his desk that I'd never seen before. Marcus at what appeared to be a company event, standing very close to a young blonde woman who had her hand resting possessively on his arm. "That's Savannah Parker," said a voice behind me. I turned to find David Morrison, the company owner's son and Marcus's direct supervisor, standing in the doorway with an expression that mixed embarrassment and concern. "She's our new administrative coordinator. Started about 8 months ago." 8 months. Exactly when Marcus had begun working longer hours and acting differently at home. "She seems friendly," I said carefully, studying the photo more closely. Savannah was beautiful in that fresh-faced, uncomplicated way that made me suddenly conscious of my own 33 years. She looked like someone who didn't carry the weight of massive secrets, or spend her days managing complex financial portfolios. She looked like someone who could offer Marcus the simple, honest relationship that our marriage had stopped being years ago. "Rebecca, David started, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. "Marcus should be finishing his meeting soon. Maybe I should go get him." "Actually, I think I'll just leave this for him," I said, setting the sandwich bag on his desk next to the photo of him and Savannah. "Tell him I stopped by, will you?" Driving home through Boulder's tree-lined streets, I felt the foundation of my carefully constructed life beginning to shift. For 6 years I'd told myself that my deception was justified, that keeping Eleanor's inheritance secret was protecting our marriage from the corrupting influence of wealth. But what if my lies had already corrupted us in ways I'd never considered? Humadapaki. What if Marcus's growing distance wasn't about work stress or the natural evolution of our relationship? What if he'd sensed the fundamental dishonesty at the heart of our marriage, and was responding by seeking connection elsewhere, with someone who represented the authentic, uncomplicated life he thought he'd signed up for? That night, as Marcus described his day in the kind of vague terms that revealed nothing while seeming to share everything, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I was going to start investigating my husband the same way I'd learned to investigate investment opportunities. Carefully, systematically, and with the understanding that the truth, no matter how painful, was always better than continuing to live a lie. I had no idea that Marcus was conducting his own investigation, and that the collision of our separate deceptions would soon expose secrets that would destroy one of us completely while setting the other free in ways neither of us could have imagined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The credit card statement arrived on a Thursday morning in November, buried beneath bills and advertisements, like a landmine waiting to explode my carefully maintained world. I almost threw it away without opening it. After all, I monitored our finances so closely that surprises were virtually impossible. But something made me pause as I sorted through the mail at our kitchen island, something about the thickness of the envelope that suggested more activity than usual. Marcus had already left for work, kissing my forehead with the same distracted affection that had become our morning routine. "Big day today," he'd murmured, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "The Henderson project is moving into final approval phase, and I need to coordinate with the city planning department." Now, staring at the visa statement spread across our granite countertop, I realized that Marcus's big days had been involving activities I knew nothing about. Dinner at the Flagstaff House, $287.50 on October 15th, but I'd been home that night, and Marcus had claimed he was working late on Henderson project documents. The Flagstaff House was Boulder's most romantic restaurant, perched on the mountainside with panoramic views of the city below. Not the kind of place someone went alone to review construction blueprints. Hotel Monaco Denver, $342.18 on October 22nd. That was the weekend Marcus had told me he was attending a construction industry conference in Colorado Springs. The Hotel Monaco was in downtown Denver, not Colorado Springs. And it was the kind of boutique hotel where couples went for romantic getaways, not business travelers looking for conference convenience. Tiffany and Company, $1,247.95 on November 3rd. Just 5 days ago, I'd been at home that evening, waiting for Marcus to return from what he'd described as a, quote, boring dinner with potential investors. Nearly $1,250 at Tiffany suggested he'd found the evening far from boring. My hands trembled as I calculated the total. Over $4,000 in charges that Marcus had hidden from our household budget discussions. But it wasn't just the money that made my stomach clench with dread. It was the pattern. Expensive dinners, luxury hotels, jewelry purchases. The classic trajectory of a man conducting an affair with someone he wanted to impress. I photographed each suspicious charge with my phone, then carefully returned the statement to its envelope. Marcus couldn't know that I'd discovered these discrepancies, not until I understood the full scope of what was happening. My years of managing a complex investment portfolio had taught me the importance of gathering complete information before making any major decisions. That afternoon, while Marcus was supposedly meeting with the Henderson Group, I drove to my real office in downtown Denver. The 30-minute commute gave me time to think about how to approach what was clearly becoming a serious marital crisis. Should I confront Marcus directly? Hire a private investigator? Try to verify his whereabouts through his coworkers? "You look troubled," observed Thomas Chen, as I entered the Whitfield Capital Management offices. My financial advisor had known me for 6 years, and had developed an uncanny ability to read my moods. Probably because managing $200 million required paying attention to every detail of my emotional state. "Personal issues," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Nothing that affects our investment strategy, but I may need some advice about protecting assets if certain situations develop." Thomas raised an eyebrow. He was one of only 3 people who knew about my secret inheritance, and he'd always been discreet about not prying into my personal life. But he was also a pragmatist who understood that marital problems could have significant financial implications. "Are we talking about prenuptial protections you should have considered years ago, or current threat assessment?" "Current threat assessment," I admitted. "And Thomas, I need to ask you something confidential. If someone wanted to investigate their spouse's activities without alerting them, what would be the most effective approach?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the same careful attention he applied to market analysis. "Rebecca, you know I'm not a private investigator. But I've had clients in similar situations, and I can tell you that half measures usually create more problems than they solve." If you're going to investigate, you need to be prepared for any outcome, including ones that might require you to take immediate action to protect your interests. He pulled out a business card from his desk drawer. Sarah Mitchell. She's a forensic accountant who also handles private investigation work. Very discreet, very thorough. If you decide to move forward, she's the best in Colorado. I stared at the card, simple white paper with black text, no fancy graphics or marketing slogans. Just a name, phone number, and the phrase Financial Investigation Services. It looked like the kind of card someone would keep in their wallet for emergencies they hoped would never come. There's something else, Thomas continued. If you're concerned about protecting your assets, we should review the structure of your trusts and shell companies. Right now, everything is set up to maintain secrecy about your wealth, but if you're facing a potential divorce situation, we might need to reconfigure things to ensure protection rather than concealment. The word divorce hit me like a physical blow. After 9 years of marriage, was I really sitting in a financial advisor's office discussing asset protection from my own husband? When had the man I'd fallen in love with in college become a potential threat to the fortune I'd been keeping secret to protect our relationship? That evening I watched Marcus return home with new eyes, cataloging details I'd previously dismissed as insignificant. His cologne was different, more expensive, more sophisticated than the drugstore aftershave he'd worn for years. His clothes fit better, suggesting he'd been shopping at higher-end stores than our budget supposedly allowed. Most telling was his phone, which he now carried with him constantly and kept face down on every surface. "How was your day?" I asked, as he hung his jacket in the front closet. It was the same question I asked every evening, but tonight I listened to his answer with the attention of someone conducting an interrogation rather than making casual conversation. "Long," Marcus replied, loosening his tie. "The Henderson Group has some new requirements for the final phase, so we had to revise several architectural elements. Might mean working some weekend hours to stay on schedule." Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence he'd been showing for months. I now knew that the Henderson project was largely complete, and that Marcus had been using it as cover for activities that had nothing to do with construction management. "That's frustrating," I said sympathetically. "Are you getting overtime pay for the weekend work?" Marcus paused in the act of checking his phone. A hesitation so brief, I almost missed it. "It's salary work, you know that. But the bonuses should be good when we close the project successfully." More deflection. Marcus had been receiving steady bonuses throughout his tenure at Morrison Construction, and I knew exactly how much money he made because I'd been secretly supplementing our income for years. If he was working additional hours, it wasn't for Morrison Construction. Over the following week, I began paying attention to patterns I'd previously ignored. Marcus left for work 15 minutes earlier than necessary and returned home later than his commute required. He received text messages at odd hours, early mornings, late evenings, weekend afternoons, when he claimed to be relaxing. His laptop, which used to sit open on our kitchen counter while he caught up on emails, now remained closed and password protected. Most revealing was how he'd begun asking subtle questions about my own schedule. When would I be working late with clients? Did I have any out-of-town bookkeeping assignments coming up? How predictable were my weekly routines? Marcus was clearly planning something that required knowing when I'd be unavailable, and given the evidence from the credit card statements, that something almost certainly involved Savannah Parker. The breaking point came on a Friday evening when Marcus announced he'd be attending a Morrison Construction team-building retreat in Vail over the weekend. "It's mandatory for all senior project managers," he explained, while packing a small suitcase with more care than he'd ever shown for actual business trips. "Trust exercises, strategic planning sessions, that kind of corporate nonsense. But David Morrison thinks it's important for company morale." I watched him pack expensive weekend clothes, items I didn't remember him owning, and felt the last vestiges of doubt evaporate. Marcus wasn't going to a corporate retreat. He was going away for a romantic weekend with his mistress, using company functions as cover, just as he'd been using the Henderson project to explain his evening absences. "That sounds like fun," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "The weather in Vail should be beautiful this time of year." "Yeah, should be nice." I'll probably be too busy with meetings to enjoy the scenery much. After Marcus left Saturday morning, I sat in our empty house, surrounded by 9 years of shared memories, and realized that I was done being the naive wife who trusted her husband's explanations, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. If Marcus was conducting an affair, I was going to find out exactly how extensive his deception had become. Me, as I called Sarah Mitchell. "Financial Investigation Services," she answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. "Ms. Mitchell," Thomas Chen referred me. "I think my husband is having an affair, and I need to know the full extent of his activities before I decide how to respond." "I see. Can you meet me Monday morning?" "I'll need detailed information about your suspicions, access to financial records, and authorization to conduct surveillance if necessary." "There's one complication," I added. "I have significant assets that my husband doesn't know about. This investigation needs to be completely confidential, because I may need to protect those assets depending on what you discover." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've handled cases involving hidden assets before. The most important thing is that we document everything properly from the beginning. If this situation leads to divorce proceedings, you'll want evidence that can't be challenged in court." Monday morning found me in Sarah Mitchell's downtown Denver office, reviewing contracts that would give her authority to investigate Marcus's financial activities, monitor his communications, and conduct physical surveillance. The process felt surreal, hiring a professional to spy on the man I'd shared a bed with for 9 years. "Based on what you've told me, I'd estimate 2 to 3 weeks for a comprehensive investigation," Sarah explained. "We'll document his activities, identify any additional financial irregularities, and determine the scope of his relationship with this Savannah Parker. The retainer is $15,000, with additional costs depending on the complexity of the case." $15,000. A significant expense for most people, but barely a rounding error in my investment portfolio. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using money Marcus didn't know I had to investigate betrayals he thought I'd never discover. "One more thing," Sarah added as I signed the contracts. "You need to be prepared for any outcome. Sometimes these investigations reveal that the suspicions were unfounded. More often, they uncover activities that are worse than the client initially suspected. Are you emotionally prepared for either possibility?" I thought about the question as I drove home through Denver's afternoon traffic. Was I prepared to learn that my suspicions were wrong, that Marcus's strange behavior had innocent explanations, or was I prepared to discover that the man I'd loved and trusted had been systematically deceiving me while I'd been keeping secrets of my own? The truth was, after 6 years of living with the secret of my inheritance, I was exhausted by deception. Whether Marcus was having an affair or not, our marriage had become a careful dance of hidden truths and unspoken suspicions. Maybe it was time for everything to come into the open, regardless of the consequences. As I pulled into our driveway in Boulder, I noticed Marcus's car was already there, even though he'd claimed the retreat would last until Sunday evening. Through our living room window, I could see him pacing while talking on his phone, his body language animated in a way that suggested excitement rather than business-related stress. I sat in my car for several minutes, watching my husband through our front window and wondering who he was talking to with such obvious pleasure. In less than 2 weeks, I would know the answer to that question, and dozens of others I hadn't even thought to ask yet. What I didn't know was that Marcus had also grown suspicious of my behavior and had already begun his own investigation into the wife he thought he knew so well. We were both about to discover that keeping secrets, even with the best intentions, inevitably corrupts the very relationships we're trying to protect. Sarah Mitchell's first report arrived exactly 2 weeks after I'd hired her, delivered in a manila envelope that felt heavy with the weight of lives about to be forever changed. I sat in my car outside our Boulder home, hands trembling as I broke the seal on evidence that would either vindicate my suspicions or destroy my marriage completely. The photographs spilled across my passenger seat like pieces of a puzzle I'd hoped would never come together. Marcus and Savannah Parker entering the Hotel Monaco downtown. Marcus and Savannah at an intimate corner table at the Flagstaff House. her hand resting on his across the white tablecloth. Marcus and Savannah kissing passionately outside what appeared to be her apartment complex. His hands tangled in her blonde hair, but it was the final photograph that made my breath catch in my throat. Savannah wearing a delicate diamond necklace that sparkled even in the restaurant's dim lighting. The same necklace, I realized with sick certainty, that had cost Marcus $1,247.95 at Tiffany & Company just 3 weeks earlier. Sarah's typed report was clinical in its thoroughness, documenting a relationship that had been developing for over 8 months. Every late Henderson project meeting had been a dinner date. Every weekend construction conference had been a romantic getaway. Every investor dinner had been another opportunity for Marcus to play the successful project manager, impressing his young mistress with expensive restaurants and luxury hotels. The financial analysis was even more damaging. Marcus had opened a secret credit card account, hidden from our joint banking arrangements, and had accumulated nearly $18,000 in debt funding his affair. But that wasn't the most shocking revelation in Sarah's report. Marcus had also been conducting his own investigation into my activities. "I discovered surveillance equipment in your home office," Sarah's report noted. Hidden cameras disguised as everyday objects, a pen holder, a picture frame, and a small clock. The devices appear to have been monitoring your computer usage and phone conversations for approximately 3 months. Your husband has been systematically documenting your financial activities. The room spun around me as I processed this information. While I'd been suspecting Marcus of having an affair, he'd been actively spying on me, trying to uncover secrets he sensed but couldn't identify. The investigation had become mutual, with both of us gathering evidence about the other's hidden life. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working late again tonight. Henderson project deadline moved up. Don't wait dinner for me." Another lie, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who believed his deception was still intact. According to Sarah's report, Marcus would be having dinner with Savannah at a new restaurant in Lodo, probably followed by another night at her apartment. I drove home and walked through our house with new eyes, seeing our shared space as a carefully monitored environment where my every move had been documented by hidden cameras. The pen holder on my desk where I managed my legitimate bookkeeping business, the framed photo from our anniversary trip to Napa, positioned to capture my computer screen, the small brass clock Marcus had given me for my birthday, which I'd thought was a sweet gesture toward punctuality. Every loving gift, every thoughtful gesture over the past 3 months had been a surveillance device designed to expose my secrets. Using a small flashlight, I located all 3 cameras and carefully examined them without touching or moving them. The devices were sophisticated, probably expensive, certainly not something Marcus could have afforded on his Morrison Construction salary. Someone was helping him, either financially or technically, to conduct this level of surveillance. That evening, I made a decision that would accelerate everything that was about to happen. Instead of confronting Marcus about the affair or the surveillance, I was going to feed him exactly the information he was looking for. If he wanted to know about my financial activities, I would make sure he discovered something that would change both our lives forever. I called Patricia Morrison, my attorney, from a secure phone in my car parked several blocks from our house. "Patricia, I need you to prepare documents for a major acquisition. I want to purchase the Denver Central Bus Terminal's management company, including all operational contracts and employee agreements. And I want Marcus to find out about it in a way that looks accidental but gives him access to the purchase details." "Rebecca, that's a significant escalation from your usual real estate investments. Are you sure this is wise given your current marital situation?" "I'm sure. And Patricia, I need you to structure the purchase so that if someone were investigating my finances, they'd discover I have access to liquid assets worth approximately $150 million. I want my husband to know exactly what he's been married to for the past 9 years." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus had been trying to uncover my financial secrets, so I would reveal them in a way that would force him to make a choice. Once he learned about my inheritance, he could either confess his affair and work toward rebuilding our marriage based on honesty, or he could accelerate his betrayal and try to position himself to benefit from my wealth through divorce proceedings. Either way, the deception and surveillance would end. Over the following week, I carefully performed for Marcus's hidden cameras. I made phone calls discussing the bus terminal acquisition, speaking loudly enough to be clearly recorded. I left documents on my desk that outlined my investment portfolio, positioned so the hidden camera in the picture frame would capture every detail. I even staged a conversation with Thomas Chen about transferring large sums from offshore accounts, ensuring that Marcus's surveillance would document my access to the kind of wealth he'd never imagined. Marcus's behavior became increasingly strange as he processed this information. He started asking casual questions about my bookkeeping business, wondering aloud how someone could make so much money from small business clients. He made offhand comments about people who inherited money and how that must change someone's perspective on life. Most tellingly, he began researching divorce law in Colorado, leaving browser histories on our shared computer that clearly showed his interest in asset division and spousal support calculations. "Rebecca," he said one evening over dinner, his tone carefully casual, "hypothetically speaking, if someone discovered they were married to a wealthy person they'd never known was wealthy, how do you think that would affect the relationship?" I looked up from my salad, meeting his eyes directly. "That would depend on why the wealthy person had kept it secret, don't you think? And what the other person planned to do with that information." Something flickered across Marcus's face. Surprise, calculation, maybe a hint of fear. He'd been gathering intelligence about my hidden assets, but he hadn't expected me to be aware of his investigation. "Just curious," he said, returning his attention to his plate. "I was reading an article about people who win the lottery and how it changes their marriages. Makes you wonder how money affects relationships." The conversation felt like a chess match, with both of us maneuvering around the truths we knew the other was hiding. Marcus had learned about my inheritance, but he didn't know that I'd discovered his affair. I knew about his surveillance and his relationship with Savannah, but I was letting him believe his investigation had been successful. 2 days later, Sarah Mitchell delivered her final report with a single phone call. "Mrs. Sullivan, you need to know that your husband met with a divorce attorney yesterday. James Reynolds, one of Denver's most aggressive matrimonial lawyers. They discussed strategies for claiming a portion of recently discovered assets in a marriage dissolution case." The news hit me like a physical blow, though I'd been expecting it since discovering Marcus's surveillance operation. He wasn't trying to save our marriage or work through our mutual deceptions. He was positioning himself to steal as much of my inheritance as possible through divorce proceedings. "There's more," Sarah continued. "Reynolds specializes in cases involving hidden assets and secret wealth. Your husband has provided him with detailed financial information about your portfolio, including account numbers and transaction histories that he could only have obtained through extensive surveillance. They're preparing to file papers claiming fraud and financial concealment." I sat in my car outside the bus terminal I now owned, watching passengers board coaches bound for destinations across the western United States, and realized that Marcus's betrayal went far deeper than a simple affair. He wasn't just cheating on our marriage, he was attempting to steal the inheritance I'd kept secret specifically to protect our relationship from the corrupting influence of wealth. The irony was devastating. Eleanor's will had required me to keep the money secret for 10 years to prove our marriage was based on love rather than financial gain. But Marcus's discovery of that wealth had revealed that he was exactly the kind of fortune hunter Eleanor had warned against. "Sarah, I need you to document everything. The affair, the surveillance, the meeting with the divorce attorney. I want a complete record of his activities before he makes any legal moves." "Already in progress." "But Mrs. Sullivan, you should know that Reynolds is known for moving quickly once he decides to take a case. If your husband is planning to file for divorce, it could happen very soon." That evening, I sat in our living room watching Marcus scroll through his phone, probably texting Savannah about their plans for the weekend. He looked relaxed, confident, probably believing he'd discovered the key to a very comfortable future. He had no idea that I knew about his affair, his surveillance, or his legal consultations. But I had one more surprise for Marcus, one that would turn his carefully planned betrayal into the biggest mistake of his life. I pulled out my own phone and began typing a message that would change everything. "Savannah, this is Rebecca Sullivan. We need to talk about Marcus. Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the Starbucks on Pearl Street. There are things about my husband you need to know before you destroy your life for him. I hit send and watched Marcus across our living room, still absorbed in his phone, still believing he held all the cards in our collapsing marriage. Tomorrow Savannah Parker would learn exactly what kind of man she'd been having an affair with, and Marcus would discover that some secrets, once revealed, can never be hidden again. The game was about to change, and this time, I would be the one controlling the rules. Savannah Parker arrived at the Pearl Street Starbucks 15 minutes early, her nervous energy evident in the way she checked her phone every 30 seconds and kept glancing toward the entrance. She'd chosen a corner table partially hidden behind a support beam, the choice of someone who didn't want to be seen having this conversation. I watched her for several minutes from across the street, studying the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband for 8 months. She was younger than me by at least 5 years, with the kind of fresh-faced beauty that required minimal makeup and expensive highlights to maintain. Her clothes were carefully chosen to look casual, while showcasing a figure that had clearly never carried children or weathered the stress of managing a 9-figure investment portfolio. When I finally entered the coffee shop, Savannah's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, fear, and finally a kind of resigned defiance that suggested she'd been expecting this confrontation eventually. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said as I approached her table, her voice steady despite the obvious tension, "I wasn't sure you'd actually come. Call me Rebecca, and I think we're past the point of formal introductions, don't you?" I sat across from her, noting how she positioned herself with a clear view of both exits. Savannah might be young, but she wasn't naive about the potential consequences of sleeping with married men. "Before you say anything," she began, "I want you to know that Marcus told me your marriage was over. He said you'd grown apart, that you were only staying together for financial reasons, and that he was planning to file for divorce." "When did he tell you that?" "About 6 months ago, when things between us started getting serious." 6 months ago. That was 3 months before Marcus had installed surveillance equipment in our home office, 3 months before he'd started questioning our household budget, and 2 months before he'd opened the secret credit card account to fund their relationship. "Savannah, I'm going to share something with you that Marcus doesn't know I know. Then I'm going to give you information that will help you understand exactly what kind of man you've been involved with." I pulled out a tablet and showed her Sarah Mitchell's surveillance photographs. Savannah's face went pale as she saw herself documented in intimate moments she'd believed were private. "Marcus has been lying to both of us," I continued. "Our marriage isn't over, and he hasn't filed for divorce. What he has done is hire a divorce attorney to help him steal money from me that he thinks I don't know he knows about." Savannah studied the photographs with growing unease. "I don't understand. Steal money? Marcus said you were having financial problems, that your bookkeeping business was struggling." "My bookkeeping business is a cover, Savannah. I'm worth approximately $150 million. The words hung in the air between us like a bomb waiting to explode. Savannah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips as she processed what I'd just revealed. "That's impossible. Marcus said you two lived paycheck to paycheck? That you were worried about making mortgage payments?" I showed her screenshots from my investment portfolio, bank statements showing account balances, and property records for my real estate holdings. With each document, Savannah's expression shifted from disbelief to understanding to horror. "He's been using you," I explained gently. "Marcus discovered my financial situation through illegal surveillance, and now he's trying to position himself for a divorce that will give him access to money he never earned. The expensive dinners, the jewelry, the weekend getaways. He's been auditioning for the role of wealthy divorcee." Savannah set down her coffee with shaking hands. "The necklace. He said he'd saved up for months to buy it for me. He charged it to a secret credit card account. Along with every restaurant, every hotel, every gift he's given you over the past 8 months. Marcus has accumulated nearly $20,000 in debt funding your relationship. But why are you telling me this? Shouldn't you hate me?" I studied her face, seeing a young woman who genuinely believed she was involved with a man leaving an unhappy marriage. Savannah wasn't a gold digger or a homewrecker. She was another victim of Marcus's increasingly sophisticated deceptions. Because you deserve to know the truth before you make any decisions about your future. And because Marcus is about to do something that will destroy both our lives, if we don't stop him. I explained about James Reynolds, the aggressive divorce attorney Marcus had consulted. About the legal strategy designed to claim that my hidden assets constituted fraud requiring massive financial compensation. About how Marcus planned to use both his affair and my secret inheritance as weapons in a legal battle that could drag on for years. Savannah, if Marcus files for divorce using Reynolds' strategy, you'll become evidence in a court case. Your relationship will be dissected publicly, your personal life will become newspaper fodder, and your career at Morrison Construction will be destroyed. Is Marcus worth that? She was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at Boulder's bustling Pearl Street Mall. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He's been asking me questions about you, about your schedule, your habits, whether you've seemed different lately. I thought he was just worried about how you'd handle the divorce announcement. He's been gathering intelligence, probably hoping you'd provide information he couldn't get from his surveillance equipment. This is insane. I thought I was dating a construction manager going through a difficult divorce. Instead, I'm involved with someone who's basically conducting corporate espionage against his own wife. I leaned forward, choosing my next words carefully. Savannah, I have a proposition for you. Help me document Marcus's real activities, and I'll make sure you land on your feet when this situation explodes. Refuse to help, and you'll go down with him when the legal proceedings begin. What kind of help? Marcus trusts you. He's probably shared details about his plans, his timeline, maybe even his strategy for the divorce proceedings. I need to know everything he's told you about his intentions. Savannah was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with the implications of betraying Marcus versus protecting herself from his larger betrayal. He mentioned a timeline, she said finally. Something about waiting until after the holidays to file papers, but moving money around before then to, quote, protect his interests. He said you'd hidden assets that legally belonged to both of you, and that his attorney was going to make sure he got his fair share. Did he mention specific amounts? He said once the divorce was final, he'd have enough money to buy a house in Aspen and maybe start his own construction company. He was talking about leaving Morrison Construction and taking me with him. The picture was becoming clearer. Marcus wasn't just planning to steal my inheritance. He was planning to use it to fund an entirely new life with Savannah, leaving me financially devastated and emotionally destroyed. There's something else you need to know, I said, pulling out another document. Marcus has been researching murder-for-hire services. Savannah's face went white. That's not possible. Sarah Mitchell, my private investigator, discovered browser histories on Marcus's personal laptop. Searches for how to make death look accidental, staged car accidents, and, quote, untraceable poisons. He's been exploring options for eliminating me entirely rather than risking a contentious divorce. The blood drained from Savannah's face as she processed this information. Whatever romantic fantasies she'd been harboring about Marcus clearly hadn't included the possibility that he was capable of murder. I need to leave. I need to think about this. Savannah, wait. I pulled out a business card. This is Sarah Mitchell's contact information. If you decide to help document Marcus's activities, call her. If you decide to run instead, call her anyway. She can help you disappear safely before Marcus realizes you know the truth. Why would you help me? I've been sleeping with your husband. Because we're both victims of the same man, and because stopping Marcus is more important than punishing you for believing his lies. After Savannah left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, reviewing everything I'd learned and planning my next moves. Marcus's betrayal had evolved far beyond a simple affair into something that threatened my life as well as my fortune. But his elaborate deception had also provided me with opportunities he couldn't anticipate. I called Patricia Morrison from my car. Patricia, I need you to prepare documentation for a criminal complaint. I have evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal surveillance, and potentially conspiracy to commit murder. I want everything ready to file the moment Marcus makes his legal move. Rebecca, are you sure about the murder allegation? That's a serious escalation. I'm sure. And Patricia, I want you to structure everything so that when this explodes, Marcus loses access to any joint assets immediately. No settlement negotiations, no lengthy court proceedings. I want him destroyed financially and legally before he knows what hit him. That evening, I returned home to find Marcus cooking dinner, an unusual gesture that had become slightly more common since he'd learned about my wealth. He was clearly positioning himself as the devoted husband who deserved consideration in any future divorce proceedings. "Good day?" he asked, stirring pasta sauce while checking his phone for what was probably the 20th time in 10 minutes. "Productive," I replied. "I met with some new clients about expanding my bookkeeping services." "That's great. Business seems to be going really well for you lately." The conversation felt like a performance, with both of us delivering lines we knew the other wouldn't believe. Marcus was fishing for information about my supposed new clients, probably hoping I'd reveal more details about my financial activities. I was testing his reactions, watching for signs that Savannah had contacted him about our meeting. His phone buzzed with a text message, and I watched his expression change from casual interest to confusion to something approaching panic as he read whatever Savannah had sent him. "Everything okay?" I asked innocently. "Just work stuff. Some complications with the Henderson project timeline." Another lie, but this one delivered with less confidence than usual. Whatever Savannah had told him, it was clearly not what Marcus had been expecting to hear. Over the following week, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic. He made multiple attempts to access my home office computer, probably trying to determine whether I'd discovered his surveillance equipment. He started carrying a second phone, suggesting he no longer trusted our regular communication channels. Most tellingly, he began asking direct questions about my financial situation, questions that revealed he was preparing for legal action sooner than originally planned. "Rebecca, hypothetically, if someone had been keeping major financial secrets from their spouse, how would that affect a divorce settlement?" "I suppose it would depend on why they kept the secrets, and whether those secrets harmed the marriage. But legally, wouldn't hidden assets be considered marital property regardless of the circumstances?" "Not necessarily. Inherited wealth, for example, often remains separate property unless it's been commingled with marital assets." I watched Marcus process this information, clearly calculating how my responses affected his legal strategy. He didn't realize that I was feeding him carefully chosen details designed to influence his timeline and tactics. By Friday evening, Marcus had made his decision. While he thought I was taking a shower, I heard him making a phone call from our home office. "Friday. Reynolds, this is Marcus Sullivan. I want to accelerate our timeline. File the papers Monday morning. And yes, I want to include everything we discussed about the hidden assets and fraudulent concealment." Standing in our bathroom, listening to my husband finalize plans to destroy my life, I felt the last vestiges of doubt disappear. Marcus had made his choice, and now I would make mine. On Monday morning, while Marcus met with James Reynolds to file divorce papers, I would be implementing a plan that would leave both of them wondering what had hit them. Sunday evening arrived with an unusual calm that felt like the quiet before a devastating storm. Marcus had spent the weekend making mysterious phone calls and organizing papers in his home office, clearly preparing for his Monday morning meeting with James Reynolds. He moved through our house with the careful precision of someone executing a long-planned strategy, unaware that every action was being documented by the same surveillance equipment he'd installed to spy on me. I had spent the weekend implementing a plan that would turn Marcus's betrayal into the foundation of his complete destruction. Sarah Mitchell arrived at my downtown Denver office at 8 p.m., carrying 3 briefcases filled with evidence that would reshape both our lives forever. The irony of meeting in the same building where I managed my secret inheritance wasn't lost on me. The wealth Marcus was trying to steal would become the instrument of his downfall. "Everything is documented," Sarah said, spreading photographs, financial records, and legal documents across my conference table. "The affair, the surveillance, the conspiracy with Reynolds, even the research into methods for making your death appear accidental. We have enough evidence to file criminal charges that will make his divorce petition look like a child's tantrum." I studied the evidence we'd assembled, seeing not just proof of Marcus's betrayal, but a roadmap for justice that would be both swift and comprehensive. What about Savannah's cooperation? She's agreed to testify about everything Marcus told her, including his plans to use the divorce settlement to fund their new life in Aspen. She also provided recordings of their recent conversations, where Marcus discussed accelerating his timeline because he was worried you were becoming suspicious. Sarah pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the room, captured during what he'd believed was a private conversation with his mistress. "Rebecca's been asking too many questions about our finances. I think she suspects something, so we need to move faster than originally planned. Reynolds thinks we can claim fraud based on her hidden assets, especially if we can prove she's been systematically deceiving me about our household income." Savannah's voice responded, "But Marcus, what if she finds out about us before you file the papers? Won't that hurt your case?" "Not if we're careful. And honestly, even if she discovers the affair, it might work in our favor. Reynolds says betrayed spouses often make emotional decisions that damage their legal position. The important thing is getting to court first, with the fraud claims. What about the other thing you mentioned, the permanent solution?" A long pause, then Marcus's voice, quieter but clearly audible. "Only if the legal route doesn't work. But I'd rather not discuss that over the phone." I felt sick listening to my husband casually discuss murdering me as a backup plan for accessing my inheritance. But the recording also provided something invaluable, concrete evidence of premeditated criminal conspiracy that would destroy any sympathy he might receive in divorce proceedings. "There's more," Sarah said, pulling out another folder. "I've documented Marcus's complete financial profile, including the secret credit card debt, unauthorized access to your personal accounts, and attempts to establish separate banking relationships in preparation for hiding assets during divorce proceedings." The evidence painted a picture of systematic fraud that went far beyond a simple extramarital affair. Marcus had been operating like a criminal enterprise, using surveillance, deception, and theft to position himself for the largest financial crime of his life. "Sarah, I want you to coordinate with Patricia Morrison tomorrow morning. When Marcus walks into Reynolds' office to file divorce papers, I want criminal charges filed simultaneously. Wire fraud, conspiracy, illegal surveillance, theft of marital assets, and conspiracy to commit murder. The murder charge might be difficult to prove beyond reasonable doubt. I don't need a conviction. I need Marcus arrested and held without bail, while we protect my assets and expose his entire scheme. Once he's in custody, Reynolds will withdraw from the divorce case, Savannah will be safe from retaliation, and I'll have time to restructure my holdings to prevent any future claims." We spent the next 3 hours reviewing every detail of the plan. Patricia Morrison would file criminal complaints with the Denver District Attorney's Office at 9 a.m. Sarah would provide evidence to support arrest warrants by 10 a.m. Marcus would be taken into custody when he arrived at Reynolds' office at 11 a.m., believing he was about to file papers that would make him wealthy beyond his dreams. But the most elegant aspect of the plan involved the bus terminal itself. "I want Marcus brought to the terminal for booking," I told Sarah. "The Denver police have a processing agreement with the terminal's security office for transportation-related arrests. I want him to realize that the woman he tried to destroy owns the very building where his freedom ends." Monday morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant Colorado sunshine that made everything seem possible. I stood in my home office, surrounded by the surveillance equipment Marcus had used to spy on me, and addressed the hidden cameras directly. "Marcus, if you're watching this recording later, I want you to know that I've always loved you. But I loved the man I thought you were, not the criminal you chose to become. Everything that happens today is the result of choices you made, consequences you earned, and justice you deserve." I pulled out each surveillance device and smashed them methodically with a hammer, destroying Marcus's ability to monitor my activities, just as he was about to discover that his own activities had been under surveillance for weeks. At 8:30 a.m., I received a text from Patricia Morrison. "Criminal complaints filed. Arrest warrants issued. Proceeding as planned." At 9:15 a.m., Sarah Mitchell texted, "Evidence packages delivered to DA's office. Marcus's phone is being monitored per court order." At 9:45 a.m., I drove to the Denver Central bus terminal and took the elevator to my private office on the 3rd floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see passengers boarding coaches bound for destinations across the country, people beginning journeys they'd planned and saved for, carrying luggage filled with hopes for whatever awaited them. Soon, Marcus would be making an unplanned journey to the same building, but his destination would be a holding cell, rather than a new beginning. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang with a call from James Reynolds. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is James Reynolds, attorney for your husband Marcus. I'm calling to inform you that we'll be filing divorce papers this morning, along with claims regarding fraudulent concealment of marital assets. I'd advise you to retain counsel immediately." "Mr. Reynolds," I replied calmly, "I'd advise you to check with the district attorney's office before you file anything. Your client is about to have much bigger problems than divorce proceedings." "I don't understand." "You will." At 11:15 a.m., Sarah Mitchell called with the update I'd been waiting for. Marcus has been arrested. He was taken into custody as he entered Reynolds' office building. The look on his face when they read the charges was, well, let's just say he wasn't expecting this particular turn of events. "Where is he now?" "Being transported to the bus terminal for processing, just as you requested." The desk sergeant said Marcus kept asking what was happening, claiming there must be some mistake because he was supposed to be filing divorce papers, not getting arrested for conspiracy and fraud. I ended the call and walked to my office window, looking down at the terminal's main entrance. Within minutes, I watched as a police transport van pulled up to the security entrance. 2 officers emerged, followed by Marcus in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his confident demeanor replaced by obvious confusion and panic. For several minutes, I watched my husband of 9 years being processed like any common criminal, fingerprinted and photographed in the basement of the building I owned. The man who'd planned to steal my inheritance and possibly murder me was now being held in a facility I'd purchased with money he'd never known I had. Milefo. My phone rang again. This time it was Savannah. "Rebecca, I just heard that Marcus was arrested. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Savannah. Are you somewhere safe?" I took your advice and called Sarah Mitchell. She helped me arrange a leave of absence from Morrison Construction and temporary housing until this situation resolves. But Rebecca, I need you to know how sorry I am. I never would have gotten involved with Marcus if I'd known the truth. I know. And Savannah, when this is all over, I want to help you start fresh somewhere else. You deserve a chance to rebuild your life away from the mess Marcus created. By afternoon, the story had broken in local media. Boulder construction manager arrested in complex fraud scheme, read the headline in the Denver Post. The article detailed Marcus's conspiracy to steal millions from his wife through fraudulent divorce proceedings, but it didn't mention my actual net worth or the full scope of his criminal activities. James Reynolds released a statement withdrawing from Marcus's case, citing quote, irreconcilable conflicts between client representations and established facts. In legal terms, Reynolds was acknowledging that Marcus had lied to him about virtually every aspect of his situation. That evening, I sat in my bus terminal office as the facility transitioned from day operations to night security mode. The building was quiet except for the occasional announcement about late-arriving coaches and the soft conversations of passengers waiting for connections to distant cities. Marcus was being held without bail pending a competency hearing, his assets frozen, his reputation destroyed, and his future reduced to hoping for a plea bargain that might reduce his sentence from decades to years. But my work wasn't finished. Marcus's arrest was just the beginning of a larger plan that would ensure he could never threaten me or anyone else again. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of publicly exposing every aspect of his criminal conspiracy, creating a permanent record that would follow him for the rest of his life. I pulled out my phone and began typing a message that would set the final phase of my plan in motion. "Thomas, please prepare documentation for a $50 million charitable foundation focused on supporting victims of domestic fraud and surveillance. I want it operational within 30 days, with Marcus's case as the founding example of why this work is necessary. The foundation would ensure that Marcus's crimes became a cautionary tale told to future victims, while providing resources for others who found themselves trapped by similar deceptions." Looking out at the terminal's main floor, I watched a young couple embrace before she boarded a coach bound for Los Angeles. They held each other with the kind of desperate affection that suggested distance and uncertainty ahead, but also hope for reunion and better days. Once, I had held Marcus the same way, believing in promises and shared dreams that had turned out to be elaborate lies. But unlike that young couple whose love appeared genuine and their separation temporary, my marriage had been revealed as a criminal conspiracy disguised as a romantic partnership. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as Marcus's legal team attempted to minimize his crimes and shift blame to me for keeping financial secrets. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt completely safe in my own skin. The man who'd tried to destroy me was locked in a cell in the basement of the building I owned, and I was finally free to build the life I'd always deserved, one based on truth rather than deception, justice rather than betrayal, and my own strength rather than dependence on anyone else's loyalty. The visiting room at the Denver County Detention Center felt like a stage set for the final act of a tragedy that had been 9 years in the making. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across institutional furniture, while guards monitored conversations through reinforced glass barriers. I sat at table 7, waiting for the man who'd shared my bed for nearly a decade to be escorted in wearing an orange jumpsuit and ankle shackles. Marcus entered the room 3 days after his arrest, looking like a shadow of the confident construction manager who'd kissed me goodbye that Monday morning, believing he was about to become a millionaire. His expensive suit had been replaced by county-issued clothing, his perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and his green eyes held a mixture of rage, desperation, and disbelief. "Rebecca," he said as he sat across from me, his voice hoarse from what I imagined had been hours of unsuccessful attempts to explain his situation to overworked public defenders. "Thank God you're here. There's been a terrible mistake. I need you to call Patricia Morrison and get me out of this place." I studied my husband's face, looking for any trace of the man I'd fallen in love with in college. But all I saw was a stranger who'd been wearing Marcus's face while systematically planning my destruction. "There's been no mistake," I said quietly. "You were arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal surveillance, theft of marital assets, and conspiracy to commit murder. Every charge is supported by evidence you created yourself." Marcus's expression shifted from desperate hope to confused anger. "Murder? Rebecca, that's insane. I never—" He stopped mid-sentence as the implications of what I'd said began to register. "How do you know the specific charges? How do you even know I was arrested for anything other than what was in the news?" "Because I'm the one who provided the evidence that put you here." The words hung in the air between us like a verdict. Marcus leaned back in his plastic chair, his face cycling through emotions too quickly for me to catalog. Shock, betrayal, calculation, and finally a cold fury that made me grateful for the guards positioned throughout the room. "You've been investigating me," he said finally. "While I was trying to save our marriage, you were building a case against me." The accusation was so perfectly inverted from reality that I almost laughed. "Marcus, you installed surveillance equipment in our home. You opened secret credit cards to fund an 8-month affair. You hired a divorce attorney to steal money you thought I'd hidden from you. And yes, you researched methods for making my death look accidental. Which part of that was saving our marriage?" "The hidden money," Marcus said, his voice taking on the tone he'd once used to cross-examine hostile witnesses during his brief stint in criminal defense. "You've been lying to me for our entire marriage about having millions of dollars. You made me live like we were struggling financially, while you had more money than we could spend in 10 lifetimes. I kept my inheritance secret to protect our marriage from exactly the kind of gold-digging behavior you demonstrated the moment you learned about it." "Protect our marriage?" Marcus's voice rose enough to attract attention from nearby tables. "You made me feel like a failure for 9 years because I couldn't provide the lifestyle you wanted. Do you have any idea what that did to my self-esteem, to my sense of worth as a husband? So you decided to cheat on me and steal my money. I decided to find someone who appreciated me for who I am, instead of comparing me to some impossible standard of wealth I didn't even know existed." The conversation felt surreal, like arguing with someone who'd constructed an entirely alternate version of our shared history. In Marcus's narrative, he was the victim of my deception, justified in his betrayal because I'd kept financial secrets. The fact that those secrets had been kept specifically to ensure our marriage was based on love rather than money seemed completely lost on him. "Marcus, let me explain something to you about the legal reality of your situation," I said, pulling out a folder I'd brought to this meeting. "The district attorney has recordings of you discussing my murder with Savannah, bank records showing you stole money from our joint accounts to fund your affair. documentation of surveillance equipment you installed illegally in our home, and testimony from your own mistress about your plans to use fraudulent divorce proceedings to steal my inheritance. I spread copies of the evidence across the table between us, watching Marcus's face as he recognized documents, photographs, and transcripts that revealed the scope of what prosecutors had assembled against him. Even if you could somehow explain away the affair and the financial theft, I continued, the conspiracy to commit murder charge carries a minimum sentence of 25 years in federal prison. Your attorney, assuming you can find one willing to take your case, will almost certainly recommend a plea bargain. Marcus stared at the evidence with the expression of someone watching their entire future collapse in real time. This is entrapment. You manipulated the situation to make me look guilty. I documented crimes you were already committing. There's a difference. What about Savannah? You destroyed her life too. Actually, I helped Savannah escape from your web of lies before you could destroy her completely. She's relocated to Seattle with a substantial settlement that will help her start over somewhere you can't find her. The mention of Savannah seemed to break something fundamental in Marcus's composure. For the first time since entering the visiting room, he looked genuinely vulnerable rather than angry or calculating. You bought her off, he said quietly. You used your money to take away the only person who ever loved me for myself. Savannah loved a fiction, Marcus. She loved the version of yourself you created specifically to manipulate her emotions. The devoted husband trapped in a loveless marriage, the ambitious construction manager being held back by financial struggles, the romantic partner planning a beautiful future together. None of that was real. It was real to me. No, it wasn't. Because if it had been real, you wouldn't have been researching ways to murder me, while planning your escape to Aspen with money you intended to steal. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, studying the evidence spread across our table. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a tone I'd never heard before. Not anger or desperation, but something approaching genuine remorse. When did you stop loving me, Rebecca? When did I become someone you could destroy this completely? The question caught me off guard because it suggested Marcus still didn't understand the fundamental nature of what had happened between us. I never stopped loving you, I said truthfully. I stopped loving you when I realized the person I'd been loving never actually existed. The Marcus I married wouldn't have stolen from me. He wouldn't have lied to me for months. And he certainly wouldn't have planned to murder me for money. But you never gave me a chance to be that person once I learned about your wealth. You assumed I'd become a gold digger, and treated me like a criminal before I'd done anything wrong. Marcus, I found out about your affair before you learned about my money. The surveillance, the secret credit cards, the lies about working late. All of that happened while you still believed we were living paycheck to paycheck. Your betrayal started long before money became a factor. This seemed to deflate Marcus's remaining arguments. He slumped in his chair, looking older than his 34 years. Probably beginning to understand that his version of events wouldn't convince a jury any more than it was convincing me. What happens now? He asked finally. Now you serve whatever sentence the judge decides you've earned. The district attorney is recommending 20 years with possibility of parole after 12, assuming you cooperate fully and provide information about any other criminal activities you've been involved in. And you? You just go back to your secret millions and pretend none of this ever happened? I go back to building a life based on honesty instead of deception. I've established a foundation to help other victims of domestic fraud and surveillance. Your case will become the founding example of why this work is necessary. Marcus stared at me across the table for a long moment, probably processing the fact that his crimes would be memorialized as a cautionary tale for future victims. Rebecca, I need you to know that I never actually intended to hurt you physically. The research about making deaths look accidental, that was just desperation talking. I would never have actually gone through with something like that. The recordings suggest otherwise, Marcus. And even if you're telling the truth now, the fact that you researched it as an option tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. A guard approached our table, indicating that visiting time was nearly over. Marcus reached across the table as if to take my hand, then seemed to remember where we were and pulled back. I'm sorry, he said simply. For all of it. For the affair, for the lies, for the surveillance. I know it doesn't matter now, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance, but saw only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine regret. "I'm sorry too, Marcus. I'm sorry that keeping my inheritance secret created the conditions that made your betrayal possible. I'm sorry that we built a marriage on mutual deception instead of trust. And I'm sorry that you chose to respond to your suspicions by becoming a criminal instead of simply asking me for the truth." The guard called time, and Marcus stood slowly, the ankle shackles making his movements awkward and deliberate. "Will you visit me again?" he asked as the guard moved to escort him back to his cell block. "No," I said quietly. "This conversation is goodbye, Marcus. Whatever we once had together ended the moment you decided to steal from me instead of trust me." As I watched my husband being led away in shackles, I felt a complex mixture of grief, relief, and something approaching peace. The man I'd loved was gone, had probably never existed in the first place, but the criminal who'd taken his place would never be able to hurt me or anyone else again. Outside the detention center, Denver's afternoon sunshine felt warm against my face as I walked toward my car. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder or wondering what secrets were being kept from me. Marcus's betrayal had been completely exposed, his criminal conspiracy had been dismantled, and his ability to threaten my future had been permanently eliminated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as his legal team attempted to minimize his crimes and negotiate a plea bargain. But tonight, I was finally free to begin building the authentic life I'd been protecting with secrets for far too long. 2 years later, I stood on the observation deck of the renovated Denver Central Bus Terminal, watching the sunset paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The facility below me bustled with activity, families reuniting, students heading home for holidays, workers commuting to night shifts, all of them unaware that the building serving their transportation needs had been the stage for one of Colorado's most complex criminal conspiracies. The terminal had been completely transformed since that day when Marcus was arrested in its basement. What had once been a gritty utilitarian transportation hub was now a modern facility featuring comfortable waiting areas, family-friendly amenities, and, most importantly to me, the headquarters of the Whitfield Foundation for Domestic Fraud Prevention. "Rebecca, the evening news crew is ready for the interview," called Jennifer Walsh, my foundation director and former forensic accountant. She'd joined our team 6 months after Marcus's conviction, bringing expertise in financial crimes and a passion for helping victims that had made our organization one of the most effective anti-fraud resources in the western United States. Tonight marked the 2nd anniversary of Marcus's sentencing, and local media wanted to feature a story about how the Whitfield Foundation had grown from a single case of marital betrayal into a resource that had helped over 500 victims of domestic financial crimes. It seemed appropriate that the interview would take place in the building where Marcus's criminal career had ended, and my new life had truly begun. "Tell me about the foundation's growth," asked Channel 7's investigative reporter Sarah Kim, as we settled into chairs overlooking the terminal's main floor. "When you established the organization, did you anticipate it would expand this quickly?" I considered the question, thinking back to those dark months when I'd been discovering the scope of Marcus's betrayal. Honestly, I thought Marcus's case was unusual in its complexity. I never imagined how many people were experiencing similar combinations of surveillance, financial theft, and emotional manipulation by trusted partners. "The statistics your foundation has compiled are staggering," Sarah continued. "Over $47 million in stolen assets recovered for victims, 23 criminal convictions resulting from your investigations, and prevention programs that have reached thousands of people. How do you measure success in this work?" Every case is different, but the common thread is that victims often feel isolated and ashamed, like they should have recognized the warning signs earlier. Our success isn't just measured in dollars recovered or criminals convicted. It's measured in helping people understand that sophisticated deception isn't a reflection of their intelligence or worth. Through the window behind Sarah, I could see passengers boarding the evening coach to Sacramento, the same route Marcus had planned to take with Savannah on the day he'd intended to abandon me at this very terminal, never knowing I owned the building. The irony still amazed me. He'd chosen the perfect location for his betrayal without realizing it would become the foundation of his destruction. "Let's talk about your personal journey," Sarah said. "Your ex-husband Marcus Sullivan was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy charges. Do you ever have contact with him?" "No. Our last conversation was in the detention center before his trial. Marcus chose to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a longer sentence at trial, which I supported because it meant Savannah and other witnesses wouldn't have to endure the trauma of testifying publicly. And Savannah Parker, the woman Marcus was having an affair with, she's become one of your foundation's most effective advocates. I smiled, thinking about Savannah's transformation from naive victim to powerful spokesperson for fraud prevention. Savannah understood that she'd been manipulated by someone who specialized in exploiting women's emotions and trust. Rather than hiding from that experience, she decided to use it to help others recognize similar tactics. She's now the director of your Seattle office. She is. And she's helped establish prevention programs at 3 major universities, teaching young women about financial red flags in relationships. Savannah turned her experience with Marcus into expertise that's protected hundreds of other women from similar manipulation. After the interview, I walked through the terminal's main concourse, noting improvements that had been implemented since I'd purchased the facility. Better lighting, more comfortable seating, upgraded security systems, and perhaps most importantly, information kiosks that provided resources for domestic violence and financial fraud victims. Sometimes the most powerful interventions happened when people were in transition, traveling between one life and another. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Chen. Foundation audit complete. $127 million in charitable giving over 2 years, with 89% of funds going directly to victim services. Eleanor would be proud. Eleanor. My grandmother's inheritance had been intended to test whether my marriage was based on love rather than money. In a way, it had provided exactly that test, just not in the way she'd expected. Marcus's response to learning about my wealth had revealed his true character, while my response to his betrayal had shown me strengths I'd never known I possessed. The evening brought my favorite time at the terminal, when the day travelers had departed and the night shift arrived. I often stayed late in my office, partly because I enjoyed the relative quiet, and partly because I'd found that late evening hours were when I did my most creative work on foundation programs and victim outreach initiatives. Tonight, however, I was expecting a visitor. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the marriage counselor Marcus and I had briefly seen during our ill-fated reconciliation attempt, had requested a meeting to discuss incorporating our case study into her professional training programs. She'd been following the Foundation's work and wanted to better understand how financial deception could evolve into criminal conspiracy. "Rebecca," she said as she entered my office, "I have to admit, when you and Marcus were in counseling, I never suspected the level of manipulation that was actually occurring." His performance as the remorseful husband was remarkably convincing. "That's exactly why we need better training for professionals who work with couples," I replied. "Marcus had been practicing deception for months by the time we reached your office. He was an expert at presenting himself as the victim while systematically planning criminal acts." Dr. Hoffman reviewed the timeline we'd compiled showing Marcus's activities during the period when they'd been attending counseling sessions. "He was meeting with his divorce attorney while promising you he was committed to rebuilding your marriage. That level of compartmentalization suggests sociopathic tendencies. What troubles me most is how many other people might be experiencing similar situations right now. Partners who seem committed to reconciliation while actually planning destruction. Which is why the Foundation's work is so crucial. You've identified patterns that mental health professionals need to understand if we're going to effectively help victims and identify perpetrators." After Dr. Hoffman left, I remained in my office, looking out at the quiet terminal and reflecting on how dramatically my life had changed since that morning when I'd first suspected Marcus of having an affair. The woman who'd once kept her inheritance secret to protect a marriage had become someone who used that same wealth to protect strangers from similar betrayals. My phone rang with a call from an unknown number. After 2 years of high-profile work with fraud victims, I'd learned to be cautious about unscreened calls, but something made me answer. "Mrs. Davidson? This is Jennifer Martinez from the Colorado Attorney General's office. I'm calling about a case that might interest the Whitfield Foundation." "What kind of case?" "A construction executive in Grand Junction who's been using surveillance equipment to monitor his wife while systematically draining their joint accounts to fund an affair. The pattern is remarkably similar to your ex-husband's activities. I felt the familiar mix of anger and determination that these calls always triggered. Another Marcus. Another victim who didn't yet know the scope of what was happening to her. "Send me the details," I said. "We'll have someone in Grand Junction by tomorrow afternoon." After ending the call, I pulled out the framed photograph on my desk, not of Marcus and me, but of the Whitfield Foundation's first graduation ceremony for victims who'd completed our financial recovery program. 12 women and 3 men who'd lost everything to trusted partners, now equipped with resources and knowledge to rebuild their lives on stronger foundations. The woman in the center of the photograph was Maria Santos, whose husband had stolen her entire inheritance to fund not just an affair but a gambling addiction that had left their family in bankruptcy. 6 months after entering our program, Maria had recovered most of her stolen assets, completed training as a financial counselor, and was now helping other victims navigate the complex process of asset recovery. "You saved my life," Maria had told me at the graduation ceremony. "Not just financially, but emotionally. You showed me that being betrayed by someone I trusted wasn't a reflection of my worth, it was a reflection of their choices." That conversation had crystallized something important for me. The foundation wasn't just about recovering stolen money or prosecuting criminals. It was about helping victims reclaim their sense of self-worth and their ability to trust their own judgment. Standing at my office window watching the last coaches of the evening depart for distant cities, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Marcus's betrayal had destroyed the life I'd thought I wanted, but it had revealed the life I was meant to live. I was no longer the woman who'd kept secrets to protect someone else's feelings. I was no longer the wife who'd made excuses for behavior that should have been unacceptable. I was someone who used wealth and influence to protect others from the kind of manipulation I'd experienced. Most importantly, I was finally living authentically. The inheritance Eleanor had left me was no longer a secret to be protected but a resource to be used purposefully. The marriage I'd thought was built on love had been revealed as a careful performance, but the work I was doing now was genuine in ways that relationship had never been. My phone buzzed with one final message of the evening, a text from Savannah in Seattle. "Just helped a University of Washington student whose boyfriend was using her credit cards to fund his affair. She's safe now, account secured, and he's been expelled. Thinking of you tonight and grateful for everything you taught me about turning pain into purpose." I smiled and typed back, "That's exactly why we do this work. Every victim we help becomes stronger, and every criminal we expose can't hurt anyone else. Sleep well knowing you've made someone's tomorrow better than their yesterday." As I gathered my things to leave the terminal, I took one last look at the main floor where passengers waited for late-night departures. Somewhere among them might be someone experiencing the kind of betrayal I'd survived. Someone who felt isolated and ashamed, wondering if they could trust their own instincts about the person they'd chosen to love. But now there were resources available. Phone numbers they could call, websites they could visit, advocates who would believe their stories and help them reclaim their lives. The Whitfield Foundation had created a network of support that hadn't existed when I'd been struggling alone with my suspicions about Marcus. Walking to my car in the terminal's well-lit parking garage, I felt the deep satisfaction that came from turning personal trauma into purposeful action. Marcus had tried to destroy me by stealing my money and betraying my trust. Instead, he'd freed me to become someone I'd never imagined. A woman who used wealth as a weapon against the kind of criminals he'd chosen to become. The bus terminal where he'd planned to abandon me had become the headquarters of an organization that would ensure his crimes were never forgotten and never repeated. And the inheritance he'd tried to steal had become the foundation for helping hundreds of other victims reclaim their lives and their futures. As I drove home through Denver's quiet streets, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't keeping any secrets from anyone. The life I was living was completely authentic, built on transparency rather than deception, purpose rather than protection. Marcus Sullivan was serving 18 years in federal prison, with earliest parole possible in 12 years. By the time he was released, the foundation built from his crimes would have helped thousands of victims and prevented countless other betrayals. The woman he'd tried to destroy had not only survived, She'd transformed his betrayal into a legacy of justice that would outlast both their marriage and his freedom. That seemed like the most perfect revenge of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.